I just want to kick off with the wash-up from the Dwahi fiasco. You do accept now, Minister, that it's a matter of public record that Mr Dwahi was found by NCAT to have breached the electoral law by failing to properly declare conflicts of interest relating to his role as a Strathfield councillor and his interest in several development companies?
Yes, that's a public record, of course.
Okay. So in respect of this whole saga, I just want to kind of go over the timeline because I think it's important. The initial complaint regarding Mr Dwahi was provided to your department on 12 December 2018, and then the instrument authorising the investigation was made some 7 months later on the 25th of July 2019. And then a prosecution was finally commenced on 16 November 2020, almost 2 years after the initial complaint. Then finally, June 2021, that's about 2.5 years after the initial complaint, Councillor Dwahi, still serving on Strathfield Council, I might add, as Mayor, is found guilty by NCAT. Do you think there's a problem here, Minister, in that the investigation into this fellow wasn't even initiated for 7 months after the initial complaint was raised, and then there was a failure to prosecute the matter for almost 2 years after the first allegation was raised back in December 2018?
Yes, Mr Buttigieg, you've raised this issue with me before, I think the last session in March this year. And I'm not going to talk in the specifics about the specifics of this case because this case is awaiting an outcome from NCAT and it would be not appropriate for me to comment. But I will say in general terms, I've expressed before my dissatisfaction with the time that some of these cases are taking to investigate. Having said that, some of them are extremely complex and some of these investigation procedures take some time. The fact is we have now, or the investigation is now complete. There is a guilty finding and NCAT will hand down their determination on I guess, the result of that. But in general terms, I've expressed that view here before and in many other venues publicly that I think these investigations take too long. But they are complex. And Ms Fishburn might like to also comment upon this case and others, but I'm not going to comment on this particular NCAT investigation. It's not appropriate for me to do that. Ms Fishburn, do you want to add to that?
Yes, thank you very much, Minister. I would agree that the timeliness of investigations is an area where we need to put some focus. As the Minister has detailed, investigations are complicated. There are numbers of actions that need to be taken in terms of procedural fairness, and I expect anyone would appreciate that if a councillor, an allegation has been made against a councillor, they should have the right to defend themselves. Having said that, I do believe that there is an opportunity for improvement in this area. I've requested a review of the OLG department to make sure that we are properly resourced to undertake investigations, and the Minister has also announced a review into the Model Code of Conduct, which I hope will provide some guidance to us in ways that we can make this process more transparent and more efficient.
I appreciate the answer, and I appreciate that due process is very important, and councillors, like anyone in society, has a right to procedural fairness. But you've got to question when it gets to the point where the actual utility of the investigation, and if the person is found to have subsequently breached, as was the case here, the utility of conducting that investigation actually gets defeated by time. It is then a chronic problem, isn't it? I mean, I put it to you that, again, the public are not availed for a period of some 2 years of the Mayor's financial interests, and therefore, in essence, the ongoing potential for the conflict in interests actually are able to be realised through the passage of time because of the delay of the investigation. So during all the time up to September 2021, last month almost, 2 months ago now, he remains in a position of public trust where he's still able to influence decisions that could benefit him. This is preposterous, isn't it?
Well, look, as I said,
one thing to say we need more resources and, you know, you agree that it's, but this is like chronic, isn't it now?
Well, look, again, I'm really not going to comment on this specific case. I've indicated that to you before because NCAT are about to announce the penalty. the time taken in general terms for this case and others. I've already expressed my concern about that to Ms Fishburn and others.
Can I ask you,
I've also
Minister-
announced a review of the Code of Conduct itself to strengthen some of those procedures so that councillors are very clear about their responsibilities.
Can I ask you,
Disclosure.
Minister, is Mr Dwyer still a member of the Liberal Party?
I wouldn't have any idea. I think I told you this last time. I've never met Mr Doohy.
I think it's pronounced Dwyer.
Thank you. Well, you know better than I then. So I don't know him. I've never met him. I don't know anything about him except what I'm aware of publicly.
Well, Minister...
I don't know whether he's a member of the party. I don't know. I don't look up the membership party lists.
Minister, are you
Nor would you be
aware
able to.
that... Are
Sorry?
you aware
Nor would you
that-
be able to.
Well, nor would I be able to.
Well, look, Minister, we're all political people and we all come here from various political parties, and the idea that these sort of things are not socialised...
You're focusing on Mr.
is
Dwyer
somewhat
because he's a
beggars
member of the
belief.
Liberal
But
Party.
anyway, look, let's move on. Are
Yes,
you aware that
let's
one
do
of the
that.
companies in which Mr Dwyer failed to disclose he had an interest in was one Lally Rosser Proprietary Limited, a director of which is Mr Robert Gregory, and a company associated with that director and its company's address Melco Property Proprietary Limited has been actively seeking options to purchase land in and around Elliott Street in Belfield, which is within the Strathfield Council area. This is all the while Mr Dwyer has participated in and overseen the highly confidential council planning processes. That land, in fact, has been identified as part of a council housing investigation area for higher density, though that information does not appear to be in any public document. So we've got a situation here where a company Dwyer is associated with neglected to declare the conflict, which was subsequently found to be the case by NCAT, and he's participating in planning decisions potentially leading to an upzoning in areas that would benefit those purchases. And see, this is the point, isn't it? The investigation drags on for 2.5 years.
question, or?
Well, I'm asking the question, can you see the issue here, Minister, where a 2.5-year saga, which still isn't resolved, allows a councillor, a mayor in fact, to continue sitting on council and being associated with a company that's buying up options in the area?
Well, look, I'm not aware of the allegations that you're suggesting to me today. I'm really not aware of them, Mr Buttigieg. And I've said to you before, this is now a matter for NCAT. NCAT have found him guilty of misconduct and are considering their punishment.
Minister,
That's all I
well,
can say.
Minister, if
I don't know why you're obsessed with this council.
I'm not obsessed at all. What I'm
member of
obsessed
the
with
Liberal
is
Party.
public probity,
Right.
and the voting public have a right. In fact, they deserve their elected
Of course
representatives
they do.
to be above reproach. And you're the minister responsible for local government, and you're telling me that we're looking into resources and we're going to change the model code of conduct. Meanwhile, these conflicts are manifest because of delays in investigation.
Well, Mr Buttigieg,
And I'm obsessed with this.
I know you are. I don't undertake investigations, nor do I become involved in investigations. I think that would be
right.
highly inappropriate for me to be
I'm not
involved.
suggesting you personally
Well, then,
investigate, Minister.
where
But
are you?
presumably you have some responsibility as a Minister of the Crown.
And that's why, as a Minister of the Crown, I have asked for a different approach to be taken to investigations with the Office of Local Government so that they can be expedited, so that there's a sense of fairness, not just for those who've made allegations, but those who perhaps are the recipients of the mistreatment in council.
Minister, would it interest you if I would...
I haven't finished my answer. So that's the extent, in my role as Minister for Local Government, as I see it, to actually, if there's a change in policy direction that's needed, I ask for that to be undertaken.
Well,
I can't dictate that.
Let's explore policy and legislation a bit further down the track, but I want to ask you, Minister, if I were to table a document which verifies that these options were being bought, would that interest you at all?
Sorry, can you repeat the question, please? I forgot to bring my writing
My
pad.
question was, Minister, if I were to table a document for the benefit of the committee that demonstrates the purchase of these options in that area in Belfield, in the Strathfield LGA, by this associated company, would that interest you as the Minister for Local Government, or should I just not bother?
I just said it's not my role to undertake investigations.
Do you want me to table the document or not? Are you interested or not?
If you referred or tabled a document of that nature, I would be, as I do, and I have done for the last 2 years, I would be referring those matters to the Office of Local Government.
So
That's what I would do.
I will table the document I will table that document. Now, I just want to move on to Mr Dwahi's contributions to the New South Wales Liberal Party. We became aware of that during that 2.5 years, gave us plenty of time to look into things. And noting your comments at the last estimates that Mr Dwahi, and I quote, is probably a property developer, have any steps been taken to refer this apparent breach of the electoral funding law for investigation?
Not to my knowledge.
No?
I don't know.
Why, Minister?
I don't know. I'm just telling you, I don't know.
You've got a member of your own party, a mayor sitting on council,
Ms
who's
Fishburn will try to
contributed
answer
to the
that.
Liberal Party.
The Minister's referring the question to Ms Fishburn. Let her answer.
Thank you very much, Minister. On the 3rd of August 2020, I can confirm that following the previous budget estimate session, OLG received correspondence alleging Mr Dwyer had breached the Oaths Act in his electoral declaration. That information had not been formally provided to OLG before. This is a matter, of course, for the Electoral Commission, not for the Minister nor for Office of Local Government, and on 23rd of September 2020, OLG appropriately referred this allegation to the New South Wales Electoral Commission for its consideration and any necessary action.
So, Minister, can I ask you, in respect of these allegations that I've tabled here today with regards to the options, a situation of a very high-profile case here, a mayor's sitting on council, found to be conflicted materially, incorrectly filled out the declaration. There were no conversations about, the fact that there was still behaviour going on down there, which would have, I would have thought the magnifying glass would have been on this council and this fellow after everything that happened. What I'm asking you, Minister, is did you have any conversations about this, any briefings pertaining to the matter whatsoever?
Look, I think, again, we went through this last time as well.
Well, no, because I'm bringing up a new situation now.
It's pertaining to the same matters and the same individual and the same principle.
Well, no, but I didn't raise the options last time. I'm specifically referring now to...
I'm talking about principles and when I become involved. And if I become involved. It's not my role to become involved in an investigation until the investigation is concluded and the Office of Local Government informs me about the conclusion.
Minister, with all due respect, I'm not referring to the investigation in respect of the incorrect completion of the declaration. I'm now asking you directly...
The principle is the same, Mr Buttigieg.
It's a very direct question. Do you have any knowledge whatsoever of the options that I referred to on Strathfield Council?
No, I don't.
Okay, thank you. Can I ask you what you think the average person in the Strathfield LGA or New South Wales generally, for that matter, would think about this, looking at it and thinking, my God, what's going on here? We have foxes in charge of the hen house. You have a fellow who's clearly conflicted and they don't even know that he's still got the capacity potentially to buy up options through a related company that he didn't declare. Does that tell you that there's a fundamental flaw in the whole legislative infrastructure here, Minister? It's pretty clear, isn't it?
As I've said to you before, I've had concerns about the length of time taken for some of these investigations. I've asked for the Office of Local Government to strengthen their investigations team to make sure this doesn't occur. I can imagine that members of the public in Strathfield might be concerned about some of these issues, but I can't really mind read as to what their concerns are 1 month out from the election, Mr. Buttigieg.
I put it to you, Minister, that if I were a property owner in Strathfield who had been duped perhaps into selling their property at market or below odds and then subsequently became aware that someone else had knowledge of an potential upzoning and stood to profit hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions of dollars, that they'd be pretty upset, wouldn't they?
I can't speculate as how people would react.
No, Minister,
and you're just hypothesising. It's a hypothetical question. I can't answer that question. I don't know.
With all due respect, Minister, that is obfuscation. Surely you have a view about that as the local government minister.
You're asking me to answer a hypothetical question, and I'm not going to do that.
Well, I put to you the situation that's going on down there, and you're just saying that it's hypothetical. It's not hypothetical. It's happened.
You just said if Mr X did Mr Y and was duped by Mr Z, then how would people feel? That is hypothetical.
Okay,
When you use the
okay.
word if, it tends to be hypothetical. And I'm not going to answer a hypothetical question, Mr Buttigieg.
You're not interested
You
in-
absolutely took up a half an hour of last estimate session with Mr Doohy.
I can assure
don't know
you,
why you're
Minister,
obsessed with him.
The fact that you're upset is not going to distract me from the
I
task
am not
at hand,
upset.
I can
You
assure
seem to be upset.
Minister, you recall that back in February 2020, the Shadow Minister for Local Government, Greg Warren, introduced a bill to ban property developers and real estate agents from becoming local councillors. Do you recall that?
Yes, I do.
Your position at the time was that you wouldn't support the bill.
Correct. Was the government's position not to support the bill?
Then back in estimates this year, March 2021, my colleague, Mr Shoebridge, asked you a question, and I quote, "Well, Minister, one of the most obvious ways of removing conflicts of interest and providing community support for the local government sector would be to pass laws to remove conflicts of interest, would it not? To actually use the Local Government Act to remove conflicts of interest for councils would be a good thing, good starting point, wouldn't you? Or would it not?" And your response was, "Well, that is your view. It is not at this stage my view. I think in terms of what you are saying, removing conflicts of interest, I do not quite know what you mean by that. Do you mean removing the ability of property developers to run for council or real estate agents to run for council? Is that what you're endeavouring to ask me?" And Mr Shoebridge goes on to say, "Yes, that's exactly what I'm asking." And you said words to the effect, I can quote the full passage, but you didn't support it at the time. Is that still your position, Minister?
It is still the government's position, but I've indicated to Mr Shoebridge that following these local government elections, it's something that I will be attending to, referring to the Joint Standing Committee on Electoral Matters, and I'll be doing that in the new year, following these elections. It wasn't appropriate to take action before the current local government elections, but it would be a matter for Cabinet for the government to decide in which case. So, you know, that's a matter for the next
But
year, the new
given
year.
what we've seen in the Dwahi fiasco and the fundamental flaws, in fact, I'd describe it as a total vacating of the legislative space that's allowed this to happen. You don't think there was some urgency about this? Like we're going to send it off to a review committee and then wait till the elections happen, and then meanwhile we can get a whole lot of things happening. Again, repeating what happened down there in
Yes,
Strathfield potentially.
I understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
I honestly do understand what you were saying. But we are going to be deferring discussion on this matter until the new year. This is, after all, one councillor out of 1,300. I think 1,300, something like that?
Approximately.
In New South Wales. We do not have this level of misconduct perhaps occurring with other councillors. Mostly, the majority are doing the right thing
Well, I put it-
and making sure their
her
disclosures
finish.
are pertinent and appropriate. So I think you're just honing in on one individual and blaming the system for his behaviour.
put it to you,
It doesn't matter
Minister.
what system occurs, you're still going to get misbehaviour
Minister,
and
is it
people
your
not
position-
Well, you want to continue
Well,
to
no, but
interrupt.
you're putting arguments to me now.
No, I'm not. I'm just
I want to
answering your
ask you
question.
another question. Is it your position then that because the case of Mr Dwahi was identified and it's a single case, that this same structural flaw which allowed this couldn't happen elsewhere? Is that
No,
your
I'm not saying
evidence?
that. No, I'm not saying that
So
at all.
does that not then suggest that if there's a structural flaw in the legislative framework, it needs to be fixed?
I'm saying that we'll be attending to that in the new year.
Can I ask you, Minister, that you'll probably recall that in June this year you introduced a bill into the council, into our House, which amended the electoral legislation laws, and by virtue of the Local Government Elections Bill, Amendment Bill, and that
Yes.
it was deemed urgent at the time, and one of the main items coming out of that amendment was to amend the Act so that political parties could fill out the declarations on behalf of their candidates. Remember that?
No. Sorry, can you repeat it, because I just was distracted.
No, that's okay.
Somebody's not on mute.
There was the Electoral Legislation Amendment, brackets Local Government Bill 2021,
Yep.
which was declared urgent by your government on the 10th of June 2021. One of the things it did, Minister, was to amend the Electoral Funding Act 2018 to enable a party agent of a registered party to elect to be the person responsible for disclosing certain political donations and electoral expenditure relating to local government. Do you recall that?
No, I don't recall that.
Well, Minister, that is very surprising because,
Mr Harwin introduced that bill, not me. That's why I can't recall it.
right.
Oh,
So
sorry.
you're, as the Minister for Local Government, you didn't have
You
any
said
case-
I introduced a bill, Mr Buttigieg. I said I couldn't recall it because, in fact, I didn't
You
introduce
recall
it.
the
Order,
bill?
order,
Do you recall
order.
the bill
Your
at all?
time
How
has
much can we take,
expired.
Thanks, Chair. Minister, I just want to finish off that line that I was pursuing in the previous bracket. I do want to take up one of your answers with respect to the emblematic case of Dwahi, where you said that with only one case amongst how many councillors was it?
I think it's about 1,300.
1,300. So is your position that because of the low obvious incidence, then there's no problem, really? Because that's a hypothetical assumption too, isn't it? Assuming that because one councillor's been found to be chronically dishonest, in fact corrupt, then
Oh, well,
the
hang on a
fact that
second.
you're now saying
the
that
allegation.
because it's one in 1,100, because it's 1 in 1,100 odd, then there's no real
No,
problem.
I'm not
That was the
saying-
implication of your answer, wasn't
Oh,
it?
was it? No, I don't think so. You might have
So what did you
misunderstood
mean,
me.
Minister?
Well, what I meant was that this is an example that you are honing in on of one councillor out of 1,300 councillors,
Mm-hmm.
the majority of whom do the right thing. That doesn't necessarily, therefore, exhibit a problem with the legislation or the legislative framework itself.
I see.
It exhibits a problem with a particular individual,
I see.
perhaps, who has. And I won't comment further because it's a matter for NCAT.
Well, Minister, so are you saying then that because this example's being used and honed in on, then this is it's inconceivable that this is happening, not happening elsewhere?
Oh, not at all. Not at all. It may well be happening elsewhere, but until I have findings from the Office of Local Government at the conclusion of their investigation into individuals, I don't know. I don't know. But it seems to be a remarkably, even if it is more than one, a remarkably small percentage of the good councillors in this state who work hard and are passionate about what they do every day.
Is it not possible that it's a function of the dilapidated legislative infrastructure that can't deal with it? When we've got 2.5-year-long investigations not producing anything,
I'm not sure that
and
it's a
allowing conflicts to
dilapidated
begin.
legislation. I've already indicated to you that I'm going to undertake a review. I've asked Ms Fishburn to attempt to expedite the investigations. That's the important thing. So victims and perpetrators, or alleged thereof, both get a result in the most timely manner. And that's what I've asked. That has not been a result of Mr Doohey's matter, but a number of other matters that have taken up to 2 years similarly to conclude for much less kind of serious behaviour. But nevertheless, because of the complexity of investigations, I found it very hard when I first became the Minister to think, why is this taking 12 months? This seems a fairly simple code of conduct breach. But when it was explained to me in more detail, the investigations, it's complex. They have to investigate a number of individuals and a number of further individuals until they get justice,
A lot of
whoever the
complex
person
things
may
in life,
be.
Minister, that we deal with in much less time. But I want to
But
go back.
I think the Secretary has told you this earlier, that we have to have justice seen to be done and done.
Absolutely.
And fairness.
Minister, I want to move back onto that bill which you correctly pointed out your colleague Mr Harwin introduced in our House
And you incorrectly stated
earlier
Order.
this year. That bill was ostensibly to try and cater for the Dwahi misfilling of the form, basically by saying political parties could take responsibility for their candidates because some of them haven't got a clue, was the implication. So that legislation that was introduced
Yes.
by Harwin was deemed to be urgent on the 10th of June 2021.
Yes.
It also contained some provisions for conducting of COVID-safe elections. Now, do you remember what happened up there? We ended up splitting the bill off into two. And because what happened was that my colleague, Mr Shoebridge, moved some amendments that would have banned developers to that bill. And what happened was that the bill got split off into two,
Yes.
and the bit that contained the developer amendments ended up being mothballed in your House, still awaiting the second read speech.
Yes.
The bit that contained your provisions for the party to fill out the forms on behalf of the candidates went through. So effectively what's happened here is that you seem to be trying to do something about filling out the form by deeming it urgent, yet the developer provisions were not deemed urgent because they were quarantined down in the lower house and they're still sitting there now.
And part of the bill.
So what's your view on that? What was the motivation behind mothballing that part of the bill in the lower house?
Well, I don't have a view on that at the moment. I've said to you that we're going to be referring that in the new year to the Joint Standing Committee on Electoral Matters for them to deal with. I think we have to consult on this. You know, the governor's position at the moment is the government's position.
It's not I mean, the government moves at lightning speed when it has to in emergency situations or situations.
You think this is an emergency?
Well, I think it's quite critical.
Well, then we differ on that.
Given what's happened to date and what we've seen can happen, I think the public would deem this to be quite serious and quite urgent, and yet we're still dithering around with electoral review committees, and why not just ban developers on council? Why? What is the issue, Minister? Do you have a fundamental philosophical opposition to it, or do you support it in principle but you can't bring your colleagues on board? I'm just interested to know.
Well, the government's position is at this stage that we will not progress with that bill in the lower house. My view is that I will deal with this in the new year. But we need to consult. We're not just going to do snap amendments in the upper house without consulting with the local government sector. That's the worst thing you could possibly do. If you really want to consult with 128 councils in New South Wales, you ask them their views.
Minister, can I ask you, do you have a policy position on this?
We just gave you one.
No, but I want to know, as the responsible minister, what would be your advocacy?
Mr Buttigieg, my policy positions are based on the welfare of the local government sector and the councils and the councillors and the staff throughout New South Wales.
What about
That's where my policy positions come from, not me.
What about voters who entrust their local councillors to do the right thing and not use information for their own benefit to the disbenefit of those voting people?
And that matter is going to be dealt with by NCAT, and I'm not going to comment any further on that. However, which way you want to ask me the question. I'll answer you in general terms about property developers. I'll answer you in general terms about code of conduct matters, but I won't answer you any more questions about Mr Duhahi because I don't know him and because NCAT is going to hand down a penalty. He's been found guilty.
But Minister,
so
with all due respect, I'm now asking you
Don't say with all due respect. It's so condescending.
Well, no, I'm not.
It's condescending.
I'm asking you about a policy position now emanating from a debacle regarding a councillor. It's not specifically about Mr Duhahi now. It's about what is the government's... I mean, this is what governments do, right? They respond with policy to anomalies in legislation that let these things happen. And I'm asking you a clear question. What is your policy position as the Minister for Local Government? We've got elections coming up. People want to know whether or not this thing can happen again.
I've answered the question. I told you I will deal with that, and I've told Mr Shoebridge I will deal with it in the new year, after the elections.
And Minister, what about real estate agents? We've discussed developers. What's your position on real estate agents
Same answer.
sitting on council?
We'll deal after consultation with the local government sector.
It's last time you indicated that you had a sort of a nuanced
well, I do with real
vis-a-vis
estate
developers.
agents.
Did you want to tease that out for us?
No, not really.
No?
I think I answered this last time. I don't really want to go through it again.
Like the best of last time's hearing.
This looks like, to me, this looks like the Liberal Party running a protection racket for developers. That's what it looks like. It's not that hard to fix this up, and yet there's this stubborn refusal time after time to even go there, which is your call as a government. I get it. So we have this situation now where a bill was deemed urgent for COVID-safe provisions, along with the filling out of the form. We had an opportunity to do something about it when Warren introduced a bill into the House. And we have a manifest conflict of interest now, not only revealed by NCAT, but now manifest in reality with that conflict being realised because this person was allowed to keep sitting on council, and we still don't have a policy response. Would that be a fair assessment?
Well, Mr Buttigieg, with all due respect, the bill that came to the lower house...
As much as you want, Minister, I don't get offended at all.
Well, I'm sorry, but the bill that came to... that you're referring to, Local Government General Regulation 2021, came as a direct response to the need for COVID-safe elections, the changes to pre-poll voting and the like, the changes to iVote. All of those things were in preparation for a COVID-safe election.
Yes.
That was the thrust of the bill. Now, you're saying that that's the main reason for that
So the bit
piece
about
of legislation.
Sorry, Minister, just to clarify, the bit about head office, if you like, completing candidates' forms, that wasn't important then. That bit.
Well, I'm sorry, that was the bill that went to the upper house by another minister. I'm talking about the bill
Not her
to which you're
responsibility.
referring and asking me about, aren't you? Aren't you asking me about my bill in the lower house?
No, I'm asking you about the bill
Oh, somebody
Harwin
else's
introduced.
bill. Oh, well, I don't, you'd have to ask Mr Harwin about that.
So as the Minister for Local Government, you have no knowledge or care about that bill?
No, I'm not. I'm saying that if you have questions
bill?
relating to that bill, you should refer them to the
But
appropriate
you're here,
minister.
Minister, you're here in front of the committee.
I
You're
know.
the
Gone
to
Minister
Minister Harwin's
for
estimates.
Local
Refer it to
Government.
Mr Harwin. I'm sorry, Mr
The bill, Minister, the bill was called the Local Government Elections Bill 2021. And you're telling me that you don't want to answer questions about that because
Wasn't her bill.
because Minister Harwin introduced it in our house. I know you don't sit in our house, so you couldn't have introduced it. But we kind of understand how this works, right? He represents you up there. He introduces the bill, and I'm asking you a question about it.
Well, I think there are some grey areas between Minister Harwin's legislation and my legislation as well.
Right.
Something which perhaps we should really attend to in the new year. But this was a matter for Minister Harwin, not the Minister for Local Government. And that's why he introduced the bill, not on my behalf, on his behalf,
Allocation
as
of
the
acts.
minister, as the relevant minister.
So the provisions that you outlined about conducting of COVID-safe elections and the
Correct,
bits
in the
that
lower house, yes.
And what about the filling out of the form from head office? That was deemed urgent, but the amendments associated with banning developers were not deemed urgent. That's
They
why
weren't the
that was-
government's
I'm
legislation.
sorry.
squirrel.
I brought legislation to the lower house in preparation for a COVID-safe election. That was the thrust and the content of that bill,
Yeah.
which was so important that
Can
we
you
did
see
that.
how a person looking
Do you
at
not
this...
think that was urgent?
Oh, I think it was very important and we support
you.
it. But can you not see how a person looking at this would think, God, they're moving heaven and earth to stop these development amendments going through, aren't they? That's what the average person thinks, isn't it? And why?
To stop development? Sorry.
To stop the amendments to deal with developers sitting on council. It looks like the government's moving heaven and earth. Look, I'll finish
It
off,
may well appear that
Minister.
way. That's your perception.
I'll
Ms.
finish
Fishburn,
off
do you
on
have
this
anything you want
point.
to add? You keep looking at me as if you might have something to add.
No, just to confirm for you, Minister, that the Electoral Act is under Minister
Mr. Harwin, yes.
Yeah.
So
Can I-
that's where there's often grey areas between the two acts, the Local Government Act and the Electoral Act. And I think really we need to clarify that because it's obviously been confusing to you and others.
Not
We need
sure
to
how the
clarify
Liberal
that in the
Party
new year.
works, Minister,
Confusing,
but
Miss-
in our show,
Not sure either, Mr. Butterkey.
clearly,
Minister
we
for Local
discuss with
Government.
each other what happens on those overlap areas because, you would think the Minister for Local Government would have an interest in what's going on in terms of local government matters, but maybe not. Look, I'll just finish off on this point. I understand that the Liberal Party is endorsing a whole number of candidates across the board, but there's quite a few LGAs where Liberal Party members are running as independents. Is that related to any of these things that I've been raising over the last half an hour?
How so? What do you mean?
Well, clearly, if you're going to run independents on council who are Liberal Party members, not under the Liberal banner, is that out of some sort of embarrassment given what we've exposed here with developers on council?
I don't think so.
No? Okay. Thanks, Minister.